još jednom u art radionici Lazareti na obaveznoj stanici prema Mljetu za rezidente, polaznike rezidencije Matthew Schembri u projektu Odiseje utočište koje sadrži 8 partnera sa raznim knjižnim rezidencijama na raznim lokacijama u Europi. I danas je s nama Matthew Schembri sa Malte. Zanimljivo je da Matthew će biti prvi malteški književnik koji će službeno posjetiti Mljet, a Mljet je zapravo otok dvojnik Malte, jer na latinskom Mljet se zove Melita, a i Malta se na latinskom zove Melita, i to je uzrokovalo mnoge povijesne zablude i čak i prijepore, jer i Mljet i Malta su bili stanice za pomorska putovanja sa Bliskog istoka prema Rimu. I ako ste išli južnim putem preko zapadne obale Italije, onda ste išli preko Malte, a ako ste išli sjevernim putem preko istočne obale Italije prema Rimu, preko Ancone recimo ili Barija, onda ste išli preko Mljeta. Tako da su zapravo Mljet i Malta imaju bližu povijest zajedničku nego što Mljet ima sa bilo kojim drugim mjestom na svijetu ili u Hrvatskoj. Znači toliko istih priča, toliko istih ruta, toliko istih poznatih slavnih povijesnih osoba koje su prošle kroz Melitu, ali ne znamo koju. Tako da i o tome možemo malo večeras razgovarati. Matthew Schembri je rođen 1993. na Malti. On je vizualni umjetnik, pisac i pjesnik koji živi i radi na Malti. Završio je studij umjetnosti i digitalnih medija te malteške književnosti na Malti. Pohađa nekoliko rezidencija u Europi i Americi. Dobio je nekoliko nagrada na primjer za najboljeg mladog vizualnog umjetnika 2017. na Malti. Ili, na primjer, za prvu svoju zbirku pjesama Hasapek je dobio nagradu za najbolju knjigu mladog autora. To je bilo prije 2 godine i bio je finalist nacionalne nagrade za knjigu 2022. Te je dobitnik nagrade za najboljeg nastupajućeg autora, Best Emerging Author, koje dodjeljuje Nacionalni centar za knjigu Malte prošle godine. Znači, to je svježa nagrada. I introduced you to your biography briefly, and I would like to know a little bit more about this diversification of your work. How come you started as a visual artist and also have 2 poetry books and a novel, and you're finishing the second novel. So how come you started so wide?
So basically, I always wanted to be a writer, so that's what I started doing. And I wrote from the age of 11, and I knew I wanted to be a writer, and so I started to write and send manuscripts to publishers, but they didn't get accepted. So then I was studying also visual arts. My 2 main subjects were visual arts and Maltese, and so my professor encouraged me to take part of an art competition, and I took part of the competition, and my installation took the first prize. And so I thought, okay, so I in art I'm being more successful than writing. So I took art seriously, visual art seriously, and I continued to write during this time. And then the novel that was published first was I submitted the manuscript for another contest in Malta, and it was chosen, and the prize included that the that the manuscript will be published, and also including also a certain amount of money. And so then I thought, okay, so my dream, came true. And then the poetry became the poetry collection was very accidental because my first poetry collection is what is called erasure poetry, and I discovered it because after I published my first novel, I went through a phase where I couldn't write anything, so I started to erase parts of my first novel to create like a new kind of. It is the same, but by erasing parts of it, I'm creating new ways of how to read the publication, the first novel, and so that's how I went into poetry too.
Your art was very socially engaged, and this performative aspect of expression is also present in your written works. One of your installations was dedicated to journalists.
Yes.
All over the world. You said, you mentioned earlier event that in 2017 a Maltese journalist was assassinated.
Yes.
And that caused protests among the journalists and artists, but nothing much changed. How did that reflect your viewpoint and your work?
Mm-hmm.
Was that some kind of turning point for you, or for young Maltese writers and artists and people in general?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the work that I made for first, as you mentioned correctly, we had like the very shocking event of a journalist being assassinated because of writing, and so I related a lot to the idea of it showed how much power writing can have, so that so much that you can be killed to not write more. And so I created this kind of a chandelier with like an amount of fountain pens, red fountain pens, that the amount was of the number of journalists that were assassinated from until today. So it was like a huge chandelier, and so you also mentioned the idea of it was very it changed a lot the culture in Malta, because we before Daphne Caruana Galizia was assassinated, we said like these things don't happen in Malta, and so it changed the culture, and we're still like affected by it, and But I go back to my first point that mostly I was really, I could relate because it is the, of course we write different things, we wrote different things, but I could relate to her as a writer.
Let's talk a little bit about a Maltese language, which is interesting and different than any other European language. Can you tell us a little bit about Maltese language and Maltese literature, and how it is to be a writer writing in a specific small language, which Croatian is not very far from in the amount of speakers?
Mm-hmm. Like it's very interesting, like of having such a very tiny island that has its own language. It's very interesting, and Maltese. It's a very interesting language because we were colonized a lot of times throughout history, and so we took we took words from different languages depending on who was the colonizer. So there is a lot of the foundation is Arabic, like Semitic, and then it's also, there is a lot of Italian influence, and then until today there is a lot of English words, which like it's interesting, like we have words in English that we don't have in Maltese, for example. So, and sometimes, if I may add, like for example, the title of my first novel, which is Stessi, is a made-up word. There is like a community which, like for example, we didn't have a word for selfies, and this community like discussed about it, and we came up with this word Stessi, which means selfies in Maltese.
Okay, so the word was not coined by some kind of institute for language, but by writers.
Yes, yes.
Okay, interesting. And I mentioned socially engaged subjects that you're occupied with. So also there were a lot of social changes in Malta in the last 20-30 years. So I don't know how many details Croatians know about Malta. I didn't know much about before we acquired a partner, Mljet, from Malta to the project. But then I did a little bit of study, and I realized that it's a complex country with a colonial history, and it was quite closed before accessing the EU about almost 20 years ago.
Yes.
So, for example, I learned today that until like 15 years ago, divorce was legally forbidden.
Yes.
In Malta. Only 15 years ago.
Yes.
But today the situation is pretty much different. So can you just shortly describe what changes are happening and how much young people and also artists are involved in these changes?
Yes. So it became really, with the change of like being part of the European Union, and I think also very, very important, the idea of social media, and the fact that something that doesn't have to take long to reach Malta, that really changed things for the better, and we are much more like open, and as we already discussed, there is the most difficult subject is the most taboo subject issue is abortion right now in Malta. So there is discussion about abortion, but most of the politicians don't want to touch the issue. But basically, it is a very liberal country.
So it's exactly, I think it's a very interesting time for Malta, and I'm very happy. I was first time there last year, and I can say that it's a very lively island and lively society, and it's very interesting that the changes are ongoing. The changes are going now in your generation. Your generation is the one that is actually carrying out big social changes. So I think we could read part of the text so the audience hears the Maltese language, which is very, very specific and beautiful. And then I can read the translation. I translated a part of the text from English. Your colleague Jake Buttigieg translated your story to English, and then we can maybe discuss the story because it's a very interesting concept. I would like to hear if you actually figured out what it's about from this passage of the story that we will read. So the story is about 20 pages long, and we will read only 3 pages. So I would like to hear your comments and to see if you have the clue what is going to happen.
So the title is Da kollu għax. 2, 6, 4, 6. Li kieku kelkom tkunu annimal, liema annimal tkunu. Ek staqsietna mis-Samira llum. Fil-klassi kulħadd tolla jdeh, kulħadd barra jiena. Alex, dan fil weġibta, u għaliex ħin. Id-nifel jistgħu jiddeċiedu li jieqfu jieħdu n-nifs, għalhekk. 1-4-0. Il-ħadd wara nofsinhar fil-kċina lussuża tal-Kopja Borġ. Mużika festiva, miżmuma b'volum baxx. Kull fejn tħares tżjien u ħelu jfakkar fi trabi. Kollox lewn il-qawsalla. Mhux eżatt kollox. Il-kejk fuq il-mejda l-kbira tan-nofs kien miksi bil-krema bajda. Eżatt quddiem mbagħad kien hemm il-Kopja Borġ, tiddandam bl-ilbies kolorit u bit-bissim żagħżugħ. Qisha se tiżżewweġ għat-tieni darba. Żaq Norma Borġ minn fuqha b'Alex. U madwar il-koppja il-mistednin anki huma libsin għal din l-okkażjoni ta' ferħ, briju waħedhom jistennew biex il-koppja ta' unqasam il-kejk. U l-orrur fuq wiċċ il-koppja u n-nifs ta' ħasda kollettiva tal-oħrajn. U l-biċċa kejk maqtuha tinstabat fuq il-mejda. Il-mili tal-biċċa kejk ma kienx qawsalla. 2-7-3. Iju twellet Norma Borġ ma setax tieqaf tistaqsi lilha nnifisha għalfejn ma kinitx għamlet abort. Għajta, għalfejn, kienet spiċċat waħedha. Għajta, għalfejn, mhux eżatt waħedha. Għajta, differenti. Għalfejn, għax l-għajta kienet tiegħi, Alex Borġ, u minn issa l-qudiem se nirrakkonta jien biss. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sve zbog toga što plus 2646. Ako bi bio životinja, koja bi životinja bio? To nas je danas pitala gospođa Samira. Svi u razredu podigli su ruke, svi osim mene. Alex, delfin, odgovorih. A zbog čega, drago dijete? Zbog toga što delfini mogu odlučiti da prestanu disati. Eto zašto. Plus 140. Nedjelja poslijepodne. U luksuznoj kuhinji koja pripada paru Borđovih, glazba za parti nepreglasna. Kamo god pogledaš, ukrasi i slatkiši koji podsjećaju na novorođenčad. Sve je obojeno u dugine boje. No, ne baš sve. Torta koja se nalazila na stolu u sredini prostorije bila je sva u bijeloj glazuri, a pred njom par odjeven u vedre boje i mladenački nasmišen, kao da se spremaju po drugi put vjenčati. Trbuh Norme Borđ jasno se vidi. Alex je razlog te vidljivosti. A oko para stoje gosti i oni su odjeveni za ovu radosnu priliku, to je tek posebna zabava samo za njih, u iščekivanju da par zareže i torta je zarezana. Užas na licima para. Skupni šokirani uzdak svih ostalih. Komad kolača koji su upravo odrezali pada ravno na stol. Krema u torti nije bila duginih boja. Plus 273. Čak i na porodu Norma se nije mogla prestati pitati zašto nije pobacila. Vrisak. Zašto? Bila je sasvim sama. Vrisak. Zašto? Ne baš sasvim sama. Vrisak, ovaj put drugačiji. Zašto? Zbog toga što je vrisak bio moj, Alex Borđ. Od sada nadalje jedino ćete čuti moj glas. So, we heard the beginning of the story. Now, would you like to explain the concept?
Sure.
And please be free to comment because I think the concept is very interesting and it's explained. It explains itself at the end of the story. But let's hear Matthew.
Yes.
Tell us what motivated you for the story and what's the concept. I'm sorry that we have to reveal the story now before you have the chance to read it to the end, but just so you know what this story is actually about.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for translating the part of the story. So, this story was born actually because there was a call for a contest that is called Essay of Words, that takes place and that is organized by the organization Mljet in Barcelona, and in this contest is open for people from the ages of 18 and 30, and you write a story. In this case, this time the theme was gender equality, and everyone from Europe is open to submit the story. So that's how the story was born. And it for me, you know, I mentioned a lot of contests, and it's because there is a deadline. It helps me a lot to write things. That's part of the reason why I take part in these contests. So, and yes, and I was inspired by a very short film that in the short film it is if a girl likes a boy, or if a boy likes a girl, it is not the norm. So it is the opposite of our kind of society. And this film is this short film. It's called Love Is All You Need, and so it shows by showing the opposite. It shows how much people queer people go through. And so it was inspired by that movie, and what that movie cannot do that I could is that I could reveal the gender, that it is a girl, that Alex, the protagonist, is a girl. The movie couldn't, because it needs to show that it's a girl, but I could hide it until the end of the story.
So the story is actually about a girl who likes a boy.
Yes.
And her surroundings reject her and accuse her because she doesn't. She's not fond of the same sex. Yes. So actually, with your story, you inverted the positions and showed how it is to feel when you are in a minority.
Yes, yes. And also, I wanted to say, because of the numbers, like the numbers, and because it's a coming of age story, it's like the numbers from before Alex was born until her later years. So I said that because the numbers most of the time they confuse people.
Basically, I asked you what the numbers mean.
Yes.
But with the numbers and with the short passages, you really achieved a certain rhythm and atmosphere, which is very nice. And how I wonder how it is today for gay community and queer people in Malta, considering this recent past that you mentioned. How it is? Is it better? Are everybody free to speak about who they are and associate whom whatever they want, or there are still problems? So,
nowhere is like a utopia. No, it's not that there is like some cases that there is hate, there is homophobia, but it is the minority most of the time. So it's very open place to live, and but actually I'm going to tell a secret about the story. In fact, that's why the first draft had a happy ending for Alex. So Alex gets older and gets married, and it finishes in a positive light. I wanted that because to show this kind of that it gets better. But when I spoke to Jake, who translated the and also helped me edit the story, we decided that it's better if we don't show that part.
I was interested because when I read the story, I didn't know about this American concept.
Yes.
That you throw a party for an unborn baby, and then the parents don't know the gender, but the baker who bakes the cake knows the gender. And then he bakes the cake, so when you cut the cake, you actually learn about the gender. Did you know about this American custom? I didn't know it either. And we commented like it's a bit bizarre. It's a bizarre custom,
yes.
Which reflects deeply engraved perceptions of gender roles.
Yes.
In society. So in another edition of our anthology of the writers who came to Mljet, we will include your story, so you will be able to read the whole story and make conclusions for yourself.
That's a nice surprise. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matthew. I brought this book to live here in Lazareti, so anybody who is interested in reading the works of the writers and poets who were here in last 3 years, you can find them in this book. A good number of them was here in Lazareti, having their literary conversation here, so maybe some of you remember them. And it's a really nice book, and it won the Most Beautiful Croatian Books Award given by the National Library at the beginning of this year. So we are very happy with it. So Matthew, what do you plan to work on next?
So basically, during the pandemic, I started to work on my second novel, and I finished it during the pandemic, and it is in the editing process right now. And because the editing process can take like long, and I'm currently like a full-time artist and writer, I decided to start writing something purely for enjoyment, for my enjoyment, and I started to write a story, a children's book that is really inspired by Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, and I have the last 4 chapters, and I wish to work on those so that it will be the first version of the manuscript will be finished here.
Good luck with finishing the manuscript on Mljet.
Thank you so much.
Near the Ulysses cave where you will work. And thank you for coming to Dubrovnik.